Okay. All right. Any new business? Anybody have anything dangling? Do we have any dangling participles from last week? Gotta hate those things. All right. And we've already lost Patricia. Patricia, you okay over there? Patricia, you okay, dear?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Are you comfy? You see, Danielle, you ain't nobody till somebody messes with you. I'm telling you, it's true.
Really?
I'm
I
gonna
like how
rewrite
she
that
just
song.
muted you.
You're nobody till somebody messes you. All right. Let's go to page 37. 37. 37 página. We're going to back up one paragraph so we can get a run at these two stories that Henry is going to tell us. So maybe if you could start, Frank, just at the first full paragraph on page 37.
What becomes visible here is that solitude molds self-righteous people into gentle, caring, forgiving persons who are so deeply convinced of their own sinfulness and so fully aware of God's even greater mercy that their life itself becomes ministry. In such a ministry, there is hardly any difference left between doing and being. When we are filled with God's merciful presence, we can do nothing other than minister because our whole being witnesses to the light that has come into the darkness. Here are two desert stories that show this tender, compassionate ministry. Of Abba Ammonas, a disciple of Anthony, it is said that in his solitude, he advanced to the point where his goodness was so great that he took no notice of wickedness. Thus, having become bishop, someone brought a young girl who was pregnant to him, saying, "See what this unhappy wretch has done? Give her a penance." But he, having marked the young girl's womb with the sign of the cross, commanded that 6 pairs of fine linen sheets should be given her, saying, "It is for fear that, when she comes to give birth, she may die, she or the child, and have nothing for the burial." But her accusers resumed, "Why did you do that? Give her a punishment." But he said to them, "Look, brothers, she is near to death. What am I to do?" Then he sent her away, and no man dared accuse anyone anymore.
Okay, let's think about this one for a second. The key line there at the very beginning is that Abba Ammonas had advanced to the point that he took no notice of wickedness. And just think about that for a second. He took no notice of wickedness. Now, in the course of the story, he refuses to punish the girl in any way. He doesn't see her wickedness. He doesn't see wickedness. He sees need that she has, and he tends to that. Is that a moral position for us to be in? How does that sound to you?
I think it is, but I also think that it isn't something that one has in mind for
Okay.
realizing that whole thing, if that makes sense.
Okay. Anyone else? Is this a moral position? Are you comfortable with this?
Well, it's consistent with grace, certainly. And I think it's what we're commanded to do. Very practically, I think of William talking once about perhaps the whole phenomenon of feeling impatient in traffic. And William said that his thinking was, the thought that came to him was like, just like me.
Yeah.
And was that accurate, William? And so it makes me think of the Desert Fathers who do this rigorous self-examination in terms of who they are and their own failings and their own flaws, which on the one hand almost prevents them from coming, making a judgment of someone else. But I think it's also consistent with grace.
Okay, I'd like to respond to that. Recently, and especially in light of the book we're reading, and I've been really struggling with the Taliban and what they are going to do, especially to women and girls, and the male interpreter, the Afghan male interpreters. I mean, I've really been struggling with this. When is it time to speak out against injustice? When do you have grace and yet behold such wickedness? I mean, what we heard or read or saw or something recently was one of the interpreters, who I guess one of the news people had developed a relationship with while this person was reporting from Afghanistan during the war. And he said they blocked his face out. This was on an evening news broadcast. We try to stay away from most of the news, all day, but try to catch up at night. And they blurred his face, and he said they will behead me and my children behead all of us in front of the family. I mean, I've really, I have a real hard time having grace, and maybe it's similar to back in the Desert Father days when this poor girl was pregnant and they were gonna probably string her up or something. But I don't know if I'm off base. I can hardly listen to this, and what they will do, especially to the girls. I mean, they're going to shut down schools. Women have been given, or were, I guess there was one woman in Parliament there, which was a huge step forward. And a lot of this goes back to, of course, history and religious wars and, quote, Christian crusades and, all of that. I mean, it's all horrible and despicable. But right now, in front of us is the Taliban going to behead people and hunting people down. So I know I've said enough. I just, I'm struggling with, when do you speak out against this kind of injustice?
I want to clarify.
Okay.
This is our conversation later. I wasn't implying it's either or.
Yeah.
I think that everyone is to receive grace. That is not to turn our heads away from wickedness and evil and atrocities. There certainly is room for justice along with grace. Anyway.
I would like to add, I was hoping we'd get there. I've been reading about Martin Luther King, was hoping, this is a segue from you too, Beth and Brady, that Martin Luther King wrote that power without love is reckless and abusive, but love without power is sentimental and anemic. And I think that's what happens in churches a lot. I experience a lot of sentimentality and anemia. And I wonder who's going to stand up for justice in power and in love, and how that looks and what people are doing in small ways, medium ways, and big ways. Not just talk about their theory of love.
I mean, with Father or Abba Aminus, right? I don't see how you could accept or understand or receive grace without first having the knowledge of your own sinfulness, as they call it, or your own flaws or your own weaknesses. How could, I mean, when it comes to the Taliban, yeah, I don't think we could extend grace because they themselves don't see their fallen state, so to speak, that they could be a recipient of grace. I don't think we could, my first thought is also what do we define as wicked? What was he talking about when she was pregnant out of wedlock? I mean, do we weight wickedness? Is there a scale on, 1 to 10, this is more wicked or this is less wicked, and then we extend our grace if they're lower on the scale, I don't know. I'm sure you, Dave, are going to help us to understand it.
Well, maybe not. I mean, but I'm so glad you guys went where I was really hoping you would go, because this is where the rubber meets the road. And when you read a story like this, and oh, isn't it sweet? But hey, let's get into the weeds here, because if we're going to allow these men and women to guide us in any way, then it's got to be real world stuff here. How in the world does something like taking no notice of wickedness in the face of the things you all are talking about, how does that fly in the real world? And that's the question that I wanted to kick around tonight, and you guys are doing a great job. And yeah, I'll give you my take on it, but maybe not yet. William, you look pregnant with something.
Well, Doug's comment there reminded me of another Martin Luther King quote that I think might actually speak to what Beth was talking about. It says, "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting anything that stands against love."
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
And I think what you're speaking about is where the love is missing, in that you can extend grace, but if atrocities are happening, if you're seeing things that are standing against the demands of love, that's the speak up point right there. And you can do it lovingly with conviction.
William, will you send that quote to Dave? And Dave, would you send it out to the rest of us?
Absolutely. And I want your quotes, Doug.
Doug, yeah, your quotes too, both of them.
I'll send it to Dave. Is that okay?
Yeah, send everything to me that you want to get to the group, and I'll make sure it gets out with the recording. Absolutely. So what William's quote is great, because it brings back into the picture the micro and the macro. And it's so important not to lose sight of that when we're trying to talk about something like this. Because in the macro, love looks like justice, and the greatest good is justice. And in the micro, love looks like mercy and compassion, and the greatest good is mercy and compassion. And we still are dealing with that. Whenever we're dealing with politics, we're dealing with the macro, and it's never going to be a perfect solution. It always is going to be a mixed bag as we deal with this. But when we're talking about the purity of taking no notice of wickedness, Michael said something interesting. He said, well, when do we actually need to dispense grace? Is there some kind of scale, between here and there? We can do it at this level, but we're not going to be able to do it at that level. And then there's a question of, until they have at least recognized their wrong, recognize I think you called it a fallen state, Michael. And then I'm reminded of Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing," in the midst of perpetrating what they were perpetrating on him. Now, he didn't have any scale whatsoever. He was just emitting grace. But that was a perpetration against him, not against somebody else. And so when do we jump in defense of somebody else? Now, in this case, this is a quote unquote victimless crime, I suppose. The girl getting pregnant out of wedlock. There may be a victim, but it's not something that's an immediate, clear and present sense of a state of abuse or something like that. But
was it grace-filled when Jesus said, "Get thee behind me, Satan"?
that's an idiomatic phrase. It just means get out of my face,
Do
basically.
you think he was being pleasant and gracious and sweet and kind?
No, I think he was irritated.
I hope.
Yeah, because that would be an idiomatic phrase of irritation in that language. Yeah, he was irritated, because he's trying to do something here and he's being undermined basically by Peter's comments. But I don't know. I mean, that's a human reaction, and Jesus was human, and so he had them. He had all the the array of emotions and everything. But I think that's I don't know that changes the sense of what we're trying to do here. But I think we do need to make this distinction. In the case of what Beth is bringing up here, it doesn't mean that we just turn a blind eye to people who are being abused and being subjugated. But I think it does mean that at the same time, interiorly, we keep that attitude of Jesus from the cross, that sense of they don't know what they're doing. They think they're doing the right thing somehow, some way, in ways we can't even fathom. They have justified this. It's just like one man's soldier is another man's revolutionary liberator. They have their own ways of looking at things. They literally don't know what they're doing. For us to be able to do what we need to do in the macro, to prosecute the perpetrators, to wage wars of liberation, if that's what it takes to free a people or to stop abuse, can we do it in such a way that we don't lose our humanity at the same time? That inside we still have the sense that we're going to prosecute this case, but we're going to visit them in jail afterwards. We're going to try to see if there's any chance of rehabilitation on the other side of this. When the Allies won World War I, they punished Germany so hard and made it so impossible for them to economically get back on their feet that they guaranteed World War II. But at the end of World War II, the United States, leading the Allies with the Marshall Plan, rebuilt Europe in such a way that we haven't had a similar conflict. And we became allies with the very people that we were fighting, both Japan and Germany. Is there a way that we can do both at the same time? And I think that's really going to have to be the sense of this. There are stories here that one that makes even less sense. One of the monks is walking along and he's beset by robbers who beat him and steal everything from him. And his friends, the other monks, or his friends, are so incensed, they gather up the robbers and they get them thrown into jail. And when they get back to the abbey, to the cloister, their elder dresses them down, and they feel so bad that they break back into the jail in the middle of the night and set all the robbers free. What do you do with a story like that? I mean, obviously it is so radical and maybe so hyperbolic that we're not supposed to take it literally, but we are supposed to learn something from it, that interiorly, even as we do what justice and love requires in the macro, that we still keep that piece of our humanity that allows us to still see another broken human being and do the best that we can for them at the same time that we have to stop what they're doing in the macro. And that's the only way that I can take this and make any kind of sense of it that helps me to guide myself, because I can't, like Beth is talking about, just completely turn a blind eye and not see wickedness anywhere. But at the same time, I remember when bin Laden was finally hunted down and killed, and people were celebrating in the streets. And I just looked at that and I said, it reminded me of John Donne, every man's death diminishes me, don't look for who the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. It's that idea that we had to do that, justice required it, but to celebrate it, is that a step too far? And I think that's the kind of line that I'm thinking we're trying to walk. What do you think about that?
Thinking of stories I've read of Mother Teresa going into the poorest neighborhoods in tough cities around the world. And she is a diminutive woman in poor clothes and sleeping on mats and no heat and carpet torn out of the places they gave her, won over a number of people. To my knowledge, she also had a lot of fire and was feisty. So there's a photo of her sticking her finger in the Pope's face and telling him what he thinks he should do. And so there's some kind of integration of people acting with power. And Dave, when you're talking, it resonates for me too. Everything you just said, that anybody who's seen any real violence and they stand by and just hope it goes away, that might be their best position. That might be what they're called to do. But there's some people that are called to take action. And that's what other people that I've spoken to have said, that some people are called to do certain things to serve and others are called to do other actions. Dr. Jim Lawson said that as he was accompanying Martin Luther King. He told me personally that people could not be on the front line. They were incapable of taking it and handling it, but they could make sandwiches and they could be in the back with first aid and they could pray and they could meet with attorneys and they could do planning sessions. That was their calling.
Mm-hmm.
And others were called to be on the front line.
William?
I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but the main theme of it is the best way to get rid of an enemy is to increase their capacity for well-being. And whenever these things like Beth was just describing, whenever I hear of these types of atrocities, I just feel convinced that there's got to be a different way of approaching how we handle these macro issues. And I think if the focus were more on increasing our enemies' capacity for well-being, thus making them a friend, is really the only way to deal with these types of crazy conflicts. But maybe that's a little too idealistic. I don't know.
It could be. Don't forget Neville Chamberlain, all right? He's been coming up more and more lately because there's a sense that America has reached its Chamberlain moment in dealing with the Taliban. In trying to placate them and trying to do what they want, we've opened the door for something that is unconscionable, just as Chamberlain tried to do with Hitler in 1939 or 38 or whenever it was, and came back and declared peace in our time. There's the unfortunate truth sometimes is the only way you can deal with a bully is with force, because that's all they understand. But
I mean,
I think in general, many ways though, William, you're right. If we can, at least in maybe smaller settings, turn our enemies into friends by helping them, then yeah, that's great. But I don't know that it's can be used as a blanket rule. I'm sorry, Michael, I cut you off.
No, I was just thinking, in the Taliban's mind, we've already increased their well-being. They got billions of dollars in weapons and military equipment. I think that the solution is exactly what you're saying is, if we're going to be one with the Father and love as the Father and be merciful as the Father and show compassion as Father, it leads me to think then, what is our ultimate goal then? Well, to me, that ultimate goal would be the preservation of the relationship, like you were saying. If we could make our enemy our brother, I think, now, is that easy? Obviously not. But, if we could somehow, like you said, better the relationship, somehow through our love and our compassion and our action, that we could win over our brother. I know that's a difficult thing to do, but it has happened. There have been instances.
Okay. Yeah, I think we all know that we can't do relationship unilaterally, though. It has to come from both sides. So, you can do as much as you can do. And then at some point, you're going to have to draw a line in the sand and say this far, no further. And that just has to happen. And sometimes in personal relationships and marriages, and sometimes on the world stage. It's just the way life is. I don't think Jesus was a pacifist, even though he said to turn the other cheek. He was talking about very specific micro relationships where we don't return tit for tat. We don't return evil for evil. And the way that he described the slap in the cheek, it would have been a backhand slap. If someone slaps you on your right cheek in a society like the Hebrews who only use their right hand, then that's going to be a backhand slap. That's the slap from a superior to a subservient. That's going to be a husband to a wife in that culture. That's going to be a master to a slave. And so he's bringing it down to something, and we have generalized it out where it never should have been. You see what I'm saying? And turned it into pacifism. But I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about, because Jesus, as Doug pointed out, did sometimes have a temper. He did clear out the temple. He did come to the defense of people who needed to be defended. In fact, his harshest attacks, if you read Matthew 23, I mean, he is not holding anything back. He calls them every name in the book, the Pharisees and the scribes, but it's in the defense of the people. And so Jesus did come to the defense of the people with harsh words and sometimes with violence. And so there is a line in the sand that I think even Jesus drew, but it was always in the defense of the other. And it wasn't for his own ego. It wasn't for his own pride. It wasn't for any of those reasons that we may fight. But I think Jesus did push back at times. And I think the two are compatible. I think there's a way we can make it compatible in our own spirit, at least. Have we kicked this one around enough, you think? Any other thoughts or comments? Is it at least starting to sound like something that you can actually apply to your own life and help? Because when I first read this story, I didn't know what to do with it. I had to really sit with it for a while and say, what do I do with this? And some of these other stories, that one of the ones that I related to, what do I do with that? How does this work in real life? And it has to make sense to us in real life.
I think of a story that I've told here before about the one law enforcement officer that I was working with.
I love that story. If the one I'm thinking, yeah, go ahead.
I think it is. You're always ahead of me. You got this queued already. The story
I got
is
the recording from last time. You want me to play it?
The short version is, at one point he was called. There had been a shooting. There had been a fatality, and he was called on. He was the first on site, and he was approaching as well, being approached by the shooter. And as he was approaching the shooter, he was praying that the shooter would not raise his gun, because he knew, as a consequence, without thought, if the shooter raised his gun, that he would shoot and take the shot. And he was praying again that the man would not raise his gun, but he did. And the officer took the shot, one shot. Man went down, and the officer ran to him and prayed over him. I see the combination there.
Yes.
Of the two.
Yep.
That is a perfect example. Not only that, he would have called 911. He would have given him CPR. He would have done everything he could to save his life after he put him down, on both ends, before and afterwards. And I think there is that is a perfect example of, I guess, what I'm trying to express.
I think of another situation too, where you see these stories of, people that are on death row, and they're having an execution, and maybe the mother of whoever the child that was killed by that murderer is there and present. And perhaps maybe when it initially happened, she probably wanted to, peel his eyes out and, see him die in pain and all of that. But maybe as time goes on, she may witness the execution, but she also may pray or say a prayer for him, or even forgive him in her heart before he goes. It's like, it's a weird combination that they might be feeling at the same time, but it's if you're feeling a little bit human, you still want to say that final prayer for that really sad person, but that's the consequence that has to happen. But you still go through those mixed feelings, which has got to be really tough. And some people don't get there. Some people are like, I want him to die in pain and, burn in hell and all that. But others, straddle that spot, and that's really tough. And that's very noble that they can even do that.
I mean, to
here's
have
the-
a soul that's gonna end up eternal somewhere. I think death is very serious. I mean, Jesus, he tells the story of leaving the 99 and going after the one. I mean, I totally understand the police story, and yeah, there are many circumstances where you have to take action, but it should never be a celebration or a rejoicing or even an arrogant or prideful thing that, oh, we just took a life. That was a lost soul now. I think it's very clear in the word that, God cherishes each and every one of our souls, no matter how sinful or wicked we are. God would hope that each and every one of us would come to know him and have that relationship with him. Yeah, I think I have really strange feelings about death because it's no light matter, whether it's a crime committed and somebody gets shot or an accident or whatever. It always grieves me when someone leaves this earth. It's just the way I am. I feel no matter how wicked, yes, justice has to be served, but we're talking a life here, so I don't know. I get a little emotional over it. Knowing, Bin Laden needed justice, but just still my heart goes out that at the last moment, he wasn't able to accept the Lord, wasn't able to correct that relationship with the Father. And I don't know that for sure. How can anybody know it? But still, the potential of someone losing a life is just horrible to me.
Dave,
Yeah,
this is making me, or I'm feeling the stuff that I have in the past a lot. And not a lot around this time, but I worked at High Desert State Prison. I know that you know about that. I don't know about the other people. I was a recreation therapist, and there was a man who had murdered 3 people. I think 3, could have been 4. He lived further north, and he was in a gang, and he ended up, he was going to be executed or possibly kept there just forever. And I surprised myself that I felt really sorry for him. I felt really sad, like I feel right now. We're talking about stuff like this. He had 2, a mom and a dad, and one of them was an alcoholic practicing, and the other was really into drugs. And so the kid started running in a gang and just got into a lot of trouble. And for it kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but I really felt stuff about that, and the guy who was going to be hanged, I guess. I'm not sure how they do it at High Desert State Prison, but I mean, it could have been me. I was I guess you'd say I am an alcoholic, but I don't do it anymore, and I know I never will. But I know what it is like to have troubles, and it could be with even just in with yourself, not because of a parent, did it to you, stuff like that. And I just think it's really interesting that we're talking about this.
well, you're right on point, Linda. You're absolutely right on point. And I think that's what we're talking about here. There is a reason that people are the way they are. And there's a reason the Taliban are the way they are. From their earliest age, they've been indoctrinated into a way of life. And they're so brainwashed. they literally don't know what they're doing. And so we can understand that, and we can have compassion for that. The person in the jail, the Taliban and others, if we go back into their lives, we find out why they are the way they are. And we can still see them as broken human beings because of that, if we're willing to have a compassionate ministry, the way Henry's talking about. At the same time, you still have to stop the evil that they're doing in the world and the abuse that they're doing. And so we can do both at the same time. You know, in the macro, for the good of the group and for the good of the individual victim, we can do what we need to do and what law and justice requires, but do it in such a way that we don't lose our humanity at the same time, that we can still see the broken individual and understand why the way they are. And even if we can't ever let them out on the quiet countryside again, because they will do the same thing again, we still can treat them compassionately and whatever we do. And that may seem like an injustice to the victims. And so you like I said, it's never a perfect solution. It's always going to be a mixed bag. But I think all we can do as individuals is watch our personal response as we look at the world stage, as we look at our own lives and our relationships and the things that happen within them, and just try to maintain that place in us that can still identify with everyone around us as human and keep that part of us alive. And I think that's the best that we can do along these lines. But it's not easy at times. And the more personal it gets, the harder it's going to be. And that's life.
Yeah.
But that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's how, at least for me, that's the way for me to read a story like this and still have it make some sense and have it be still prescriptive for me in terms of how I'm going to try to live my life more and more like Jesus and closer. Why don't we read the next story and see how it may build on that? Go ahead, Frank.
This story illustrates beautifully how the compassionate person is so aware of the suffering of others that it is not even possible for him or her to dwell on their sins. The second story makes clear how extremely careful and sensitive is a compassionate minister. 3 old men, of whom one had a bad reputation, came one day to Abba Achilles. The first asked him, "Father, make me a fishing net." "I will not make you one," he replied. Then the second said, "Of your charity make one, so that we may have a souvenir of you in the monastery." But he said, "I do not have time." Then the third one, who had a bad reputation, said, "Make me a fishing net, so that I may have something from your hands, Father." Abba Achilles answered him at once, "For you I will make one." Then the other 2 old men asked him privately, "Why did you not want to do what we asked you, but you promised to do what he asked?" The old man gave them this answer, "I told you I would not make one, and you were not disappointed, since you thought I had no time. But if I had not made one for him, he would have said, 'The old man has heard about my sin, and that is why he does not want to make me anything.' And so our relationship would have been broken. But now I have cheered his soul, so that he will not be overcome with grief." Here indeed is ministry in its purest form, a compassionate ministry born of solitude. Anthony and his followers, who escaped the compulsions of the world, did so not out of disdain for people, but in order to be able to save them. Thomas Merton, who described these monks as people who swam for their life in order not to drown in the sinking ship of their society, remarks, "They knew they were helpless to do any good for others as long as they floundered about in the wreckage. But once they got a foothold on solid ground, things were different. Then they had not only the power, but even the obligation to pull the whole world to safety after them." Thus, in and through solitude, we do not move away from people. On the contrary, we move closer to them through compassionate ministry.
Okay. Another interesting story, huh? Goes in a direction that you probably didn't anticipate, kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense. Again, not Jesus is huge on this in Matthew 5 when he's redefining the law. It's that you can't bring a one size fits all, just blanket policy to bear on every situation that you encounter. That's only going to be abusive, and it's going to be intolerant, and it's going to be all the things that we hate in personal relationships. But if we bring our whole being to each instance, each moment, each choice, then we can choose what love really requires. And you see this man doing this in the case of being asked 3 times to make a fishing net. The time that he makes it is because it's the compassionate thing to do. And seeing who he's talking to, knowing who he's talking to. When Jesus says, don't cast your pearls of wisdom before swine, they're going to just trample it. It sounds condescending and disdainful, but really what he's saying is know who you're talking to. You don't just drop leaflets from 30,000 feet and just keep handing out flyers and think that you're notching your belt with get to know the person. It starts with relationship. Jesus always starts with relationship. He touches the leper before he heals him. He establishes connection. He tells the paralytic, he calls him son, a term of endearment, a term of family and connection before he declares that his sins are healed. He accepts dinner from Levi, Matthew, before Levi has done anything to deserve his presence at his home. And so we see Jesus always moving first with relationship, always leading with mother, with Ima before he lays down Abba, lays down Father. The last thing he says to a person is go and sin no more. Not the first thing. It's relationship first. And I think that also can guide us in this way of compassion and help us to navigate all the choices we have to make. And I love what he's saying here also in terms of, that everything that these fathers and mothers did on a good day, I suppose, was not out of disdain for people, but in order to be able to help them, to save them, to establish relationship with them. And we've talked about the fact that they headed for the hills. Didn't they leave the very people that they were supposed to help? And how did that look? I want to read about 3 pages from Merton here that I'm hoping is going to jump right off of what we're talking about and kind of hopefully pull all this together for us in a way that we can really get a clearer picture of these people, how they lived and what they did. So are you seeing the pages from the introduction?
Yeah.
Okay. So on page 15 on the right hand side, the first full paragraph is where I'm going to start. So what kind of life did the fathers lead? A word of explanation may help us understand their sayings better. The Desert Fathers are usually referred to as abbot, abbas, or elder, senex. An abbot was not then, as now, a canonically elected superior of a community. I didn't read that very well. An abbot was not then, as now, a canonically elected superior of a community, but any monk or hermit who had been tried by years in the desert and proved himself a servant of God. With them or near them lived brethren and novices, those who were still in the process of learning the life. The novices still needed the continuous supervision of an elder and lived with one in order to be instructed by his word and example. The brethren lived on their own, but occasionally resorted to a nearby elder for advice. So you're starting to get the picture here. They had a way of bringing new people on. The novice, the person who was just fresh in the door, lived with somebody, had someone by their side, 24/7, so that they wouldn't lose their minds out there in the desert or get off in some weird space. And then as they got older, then they were able to live on their own as brethren, but they were still in close enough proximity that they could connect with each other. Most of the characters represented in these sayings and stories are men who are on their way, quote unquote, to purity of heart, rather than men who have fully arrived. The Desert Fathers, inspired by Clement and Origen and the Neoplatonic tradition, were sometimes confident that they could rise above all passion and become impervious to anger, lust, pride, and all the rest. But we find little in these sayings to encourage those who believed that Christian perfection was a matter of apatheia, impassivity. The praise of monks, quote unquote, beyond all passion, seems indeed to have come from the tourists who passed briefly through the deserts and went home to write books about what they had seen, rather than from those who had spent their whole life in the wilderness. These latter were much more inclined to accept the common realities of life and be content with the ordinary lot of man who has to struggle all his life to overcome himself. That's a huge point there. Everybody was putting these, who came from the outside in, were putting them way up on pedestals and writing all of these legendary and overblown and hyperbolic stories about them. But those who were actually there living the life day in and day out saw things much more practically, much more realistically, and wrote about them as such. And so we see men who didn't see themselves as finished products. We didn't see themselves as having this huge wisdom and ability to be Christ-like. They saw themselves as just people still struggling along with each other. The wisdom of the verba, that's just Latin for the words. The verba is just the words of the fathers, is seen in the story of the monk John, who boasted that he was beyond all temptation and was advised by a shrewd elder to pray to God for a few good, solid battles in order that his life might continue to be worth something. I love that. At certain times, all the solitaries and novices would come together for the liturgical synaxis, the mass and prayers in common. And after this, they might eat together and hold a kind of chapter meeting to discuss communal problems. Then they returned to their solitude, where they spent their time working and praying. They supported themselves by the labor of their hands, usually weaving baskets and mats out of palm leaves or reeds. These they sold in nearby towns. There is sometimes question in the verba of matters relating to the work and to the commerce involved. Charity and hospitality were matters of top priority and took precedence over fasting and personal ascetic routines. The countless sayings which bear witness to this warm-hearted friendliness should be sufficient to take care of accusations that these men hated their own kind. Indeed, there was more real love, understanding, and kindliness in the desert than in the cities, where then as now it was every man for himself. This fact is all the more important because the very essence of the Christian message is charity, unity in Christ. The Christian mystics of all ages sought and found not only the unification of their own being, not only union with God, but union with one another in the Spirit of God. To seek a union with God that would imply complete separation in spirit as well as in body from the rest of mankind would be to a Christian saint not only absurd, but the very opposite of sanctity. Isolation in the self, inability to go out of oneself to others, would mean incapacity for any form of self-transcendence. Incapacity for any form of self-transcendence. That means the inability to step outside of the bubble of the egoic consciousness. To be thus the prisoner of one's own selfhood is, in fact, to be in hell, a truth that Sartre, even though professing himself an atheist, has expressed in the most arresting fashion in his play No Exit. All through the Verba Signorum, we find a repeated insistence on the primacy of love over everything else in the spiritual life, over knowledge, gnosis, asceticism, contemplation, solitude, prayer. Love, in fact, is the spiritual life. And without it, all the other exercises of the Spirit, however lofty, are emptied of content and become mere illusions. The more lofty they are, the more dangerous the illusion. Love, of course, means something much more than mere sentiment, much more than token favors and perfunctory alms deeds. Love means an interior and spiritual identification with one's brother, so that he is not regarded as an object to which one does good. The fact is that good done to another as to an object is of little or no spiritual value. That's an important sentence. The fact is that love, that good done to another as an object is of little or no spiritual value. Why? Because if you're subject to object, you have created and are maintaining the separation between the two of you. And love is the union of lover and beloved. If you're maintaining a separation and just doing a transaction, then you've missed the whole point of what's going on. That's why he says it's of little or no spiritual value. Love takes one's neighbor as one's other self and loves him with all the immense humility and discretion and reserve and reverence without which no one can presume to enter into the sanctuary of another's subjectivity. Now there's a sentence for you. From such love, all authoritarian brutality, all exploitation, domineering, and condescension must necessarily be absent. The saints of the desert were enemies of every subtle or gross expedient by which the spiritual man contrives to bully those he thinks inferior to himself, thus gratifying his own ego. They had renounced everything that savored of punishment and revenge, however hidden it might be. Huge stylistic difference between Merton and Nouwen, of course. But I hope that, and maybe if you read that over to yourself later and absorb it, it'll give you a deeper sense of what Nouwen is also talking about here. This transformation that took place within these men and women, and how they could interiorly take no notice of wickedness, even as they did what they needed to do within their own communities.
So John Gibson was right.
About what?
Love.
All you need is love?
Well, he's
Da, da, da,
always
da, da.
preaching. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, Jesus said the same thing. He says, you're going to be my followers. You're going to be known as my followers because of your love, not because of your doctrine, not because of the color hats you wear, not because of anything else that identifies you. It's just love. You know, that's it. And that's what it comes down to. If we don't have that, then no matter what we're doing, it's just a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal, right? Over and over from so many different characters within the New Testament, we hear the same message over and over again, and yet we still miss it. We still identify ourselves by our theology, by our doctrine, by our practice, by all these things that matter not to any of these people who have really crossed that threshold into what the gospel is really trying to show us and teach us. All that stuff just falls away. It doesn't matter anymore when you get into this atmosphere that Jesus is trying to take us.
Dave,
I like-
I was thinking with what you were just reading that I believe this love with power that's not sentimental, not just anemic, but looks for love and justice, calls for ripening with power. And I think in my life, and a lot of people I've been around, people go to primitive power quickly or just get away from it and don't ripen with it, don't integrate it. And it's too easy just to become righteous and harsh and critical because that's instinctive. That's going to an instinctive part of the brain.
Mm.
And yet to be able to go there and come back out of it while still holding power is some kind of ripening that will confront behavior and not condemn the person and still have some compassion while confronting behavior. But I think we stop short and just say a person's a jerk or any kind of word we can come up with that feels true and righteous, but it's very unripe. It's very, very immature. And so we either dive into the sort of dark power and then leave it, but not ripen with it. And I don't think there are many models of that I've been around. And I wonder how many models we all have been around. And if we can share those stories of our own experiences or models of people exercising vital power.
I think Brady told us one, that cop is a great
But I'm
model.
talking about us, not others.
Oh,
Not others, us.
you mean this holy 14 right here, you're talking about this? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Who wants to cast that first stone?
I didn't think it was a stone. I thought it was a softball.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Well, I don't know if this qualifies, but I've worked with people over the years. I've had to fire people that I am still friends with. That, 2-3 weeks after I had to let him go, like we can go out and have a drink. Even while I was doing it, in the midst of doing it, there was something unique going on. because I was valuing their experience and what they went through. And I was valuing what the company needed and what my other employees needed. And ultimately, they had to go. But I don't know if I would think of it in the way you're describing it there, Doug. But
It sounds like it. It sounds like it to me, William. There had to be something strong going on around firing.
yeah, it was intense. It was intense, but it was.
That's what I mean, managing the intensity, probably.
Yeah. But going back to Dave's reading there, it kept bringing up this line from A Course in Miracles that I know it's a bit cliched, but it says, the greater the offense, the greater the cry for love. And I have found that really works for me if I can remember it and let it kind of sink into place. But I think what Dave highlighted about expressions of love without identification with the beloved has little spiritual value. Because one of the things I pushed back with that idea of the greater the offense, the greater the cry for love is unless you can identify with the other person, then it's just another trap, I guess. It's another
dismissive, and it's just an opportunity to dismiss them, I think.
It might not be dealing with something that really needs to be dealt with.
Something like this defies an easy answer. Something like this defies the easy ability, if you're really going to take it seriously, to resolve the paradox. Because what we really are talking about here is a paradox, right? We're trying to stay within the horns of the dilemma, and this is going back to the last book, without flopping down to one side or another. It creates that cognitive dissonance. It creates the disturbance. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is get back to equilibrium. We want to just have all of that tension just released. And if we do that by just choosing one side or another, then we don't learn anything. As Jesus would say, you have your reward in full, right? But if we're willing to press through and allow the disturbance to continue, on the far side of that, we'll find how it all comes back together again in a way, at least within our own spirit, a way that we personally can respond and a way that we personally can work through this to our own satisfaction. Because remember, if you're wishing that someone would burn in hell, guess what? You're already there.
Yeah. Living it.
So where do you want to live?
Yeah.
And forgiveness is about your own liberation from victimhood, your own freedom from the resentment and the bitterness and everything else that goes along with maintaining that disparity in a relationship. And so for us to get free of that, to get to the other side, to be able to still see the person that we're needing to prosecute, but in such a way that we're still free of that, we're still allowing the sense of judgment to pass through and over and beyond, then I think we're living true to the spirit of all of this. And I think that's the best we can do. We can't just turn a blind eye to everything that's going on. And sometimes we're going to be required to come to somebody's defense. And what does that look like? I don't know. It can be anything from lethal force down to, a gesture or a word. But I think we need to be up for that. Jesus was. What does that look like? And how do you maintain that inner sense of connection, even as you're doing what you need to do to protect those who need protecting? I think that's the key where all this is going. I thought we were going to finish the section, but the conclusion will have to wait. We're doing a cliffhanger tonight, everybody. You're going to have to wait for the conclusion, and then we'll jump into silence. That'll be the next section. So we started with solitude, and then we're going to move into silence and see what he has to say about that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for really being honest. Beth, thanks for kicking off the first dissension, the first shot across the bow, because that got all the juices going and so that was great, because I really wanted to dig into this in exactly the way that we did, because it's so easy to just leave it as a platitude, as this sweet smelling perfunctory thing that does us absolutely no good if we're not willing to really dig down and see how it pertains. Because it's not simple and it's not easy for us to deal with these things. Okie dokie. I think we're at time. So Scott, could you give us a closing prayer?
Absolutely. Father God, we're just grateful to join together in these meetings and use the technology that's provided to connect with each other. My prayer is that by connecting with each other and spending time studying things that have been written about you or experiences that people have, is that we'll get a closer relationship with you. We'll find new mechanisms and ways to connect with you. Helpful hints in our life. Guardrails that you put in place in our lives to help us stay on the right, straight path. Lord, we want to lift up all the craziness that's going on in this world and set it at your feet and just ask you, what should we do? How should we act? When should we move out? When should we stand still, waiting our orders, Lord? It's hard to tell which way to go. So let us have love in our heart, compassion in mind, and the peace that surpasses understanding along with your wisdom, Lord. We ask these things so that we may better serve each other in love and compassion, Lord. So we ask it in your holy name and by your example. Amen.
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 Hey, thanks everybody. Another good night.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Night.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Hi, Jordana.
See you Sunday.
Bye. Okay.
Bye.
Hey, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, Linda. Bye, Jordana. Bye, Michael.
Bye.
I see you guys on Sunday.
Okay.
Bye, Linda. Bye, Dave. See you guys Sunday.